I don't think I'll ever understand Netflix. How can the same executives, who signed on to such forward-thinking, cinematic, boundary-pushing material, also sign on to something like Bird Box? I don't think I'll ever understand the masses either. How can a public, who's generally caught up to speed in pop culture, not realize when they're being fed a complete rehash of stuff they've seen a million times, and love it? Like, fucking love it. I saw the ad for this film at, I think, a screening of Shoplifters at the IFC Center in New York, and I remember thinking, what the hell is this? I didn't see it advertised anywhere else except for another screening at the IFC, and the IFC usually advertises pretty small-scale films, so I was thoroughly certain that no one would see this movie. This week I logged into Twitter and saw a Bird Box meme. I was surprised someone had seen it. I was even more surprised to see hundreds, plural, of thousands of retweets, followed by meme after meme after meme, each raking in significantly more retweets than the average viral tweet. Even by typical Twitter analytics standards, this was an anomaly. But for a film like this, it's unheard of. This movie's fucking everywhere, and I don't understand why. It's blowing up even more than 13 Reasons Why did back in the day. This feels like if my 13 Reasons Why videos were a movie that did pretty well critically and commercially, well enough to get a lazy sequel, which is this video, and the villain is just the villain from the first movie, but bigger and stronger. That's what this feels like. So in case I didn't make it clear, I didn't like this movie, and I'm gonna spend the remainder of this video explaining why. I will start, however, by stating what I did like. This title design is kinda neat. It's like the water, but a different part of the water. There are one or two shots in this movie that are dynamic and look kinda nice. A couple nice drone shots too. Sandra Bullock and Trevante Rhodes do what they can. They're both talented actors, and hopefully no one will remember that Bird Box was ever in their filmography. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into the thick of it. This has got to be some of the worst editing I've seen all year. I don't know if that's because of the script supervisor not doing their job well or what, because almost every cut contains some sort of continuity error. But even if continuity were maintained, the editing would still be terrible. Half the time when they cut on action, the next shot will have noticeably skipped a decent amount of the action. And there are so many scenes where, for no reason, it'll just cut to a different angle every 3 seconds. It's like the film is so afraid of its audience losing interest, it doesn't dare linger on a single shot and let an emotional beat play out. And as a result, we get these headache-inducing ADHD edits. There's even some comedic editing that totally breaks the tension, which feels reminiscent of a YouTube comedy sketch. A lot of the time the film feels more like a parody than a serious film, but that's clearly not what they were going for. And that's not to mention the pacing of this film. I understand that it's difficult to compress an entire book into a 2-hour film, but this is Netflix, and this is 2018. With some slower editing, some extended and additional scenes, this could be a competently structured, decently paced 3-part miniseries. But instead we get 10 minutes of exposition and then shit hits the fan, and these characters just accept everything so quickly it eliminates any sense of gravity as to what's happening. Oh man, this mass suicide thing looks pretty serious. 10 minutes later. Oh no, it's happening. 30 seconds later. Oh no, an explosion. Just look at how they react to a fucking explosion. Another 30 seconds later. Oh no, my sister died after this car crash where neither of us broke any bones or received any real damage aside from some blood on my now dead sister's head. Even when John Malkovich's wife dies, it takes him about 10 seconds to be like, now she's dead, and it's all because of you, rather than freaking out because his fucking wife just blew up. And then after about 2 minutes in the house together, they're like, yep, it's happening. This is the end of the world. There's nothing we can do about it. So this guy takes some pills and this girl goes,
hey, did I mention I'm a fucking cop?
Okay, that's fucking great. What is being a cop gonna do for you now? And I guess even though I thought they all knew it was from sight that people were killing themselves, there's a scene where they're like, wait, let's figure out what's causing it. And it takes them all but 2 seconds to deduce. But somehow it takes them 3 days to realize that they have security cameras at their disposal. But I'm getting ahead of myself, plunging into the content of this film. There are still some technical aspects I'd like to discuss. I can't decide if the flat, low-contrast lighting looks more like a rom-com or a YouTube comedy sketch, and the editing certainly doesn't help with that. Again, there are some shots that look kinda nice, but they're very sparse. There are also a lot of other things that, for cinematography reasons or editing reasons or otherwise, just look bad, and I'm gonna list a few of those off real quick. The CGI birds, Gary's colored contacts, Olympia jumping out the window, this girl's head hitting not nearly hard enough to crack that glass, Greg's death, which is logistically hard to buy but also looks terrible from the CGI blood to the hard cut to his already pooled blood And of course, Cheryl stabbing herself in the neck, which was ripped straight out of The Happening, which I should mention has the exact same plot as this film. But at least that film, and this is probably the only time I'll ever give props to The Happening, at least that film tried to show the mass suicides in a visually engaging way rather than through news reports, which is a trope I'm surprised is still being unironically used in 2018. But you know what? This is a film about not being able to see, so I don't think the visuals are nearly as important as the sound design, right? Let's take a look at that. You'd think the production would pay the keenest attention to sound design because that's what the characters used to get around. Well, clearly they didn't. Sandra Bullock parks the boat because in the middle of the flowing river she heard these bamboo chimes, and as she approaches them, they do not change volume whatsoever. They are the exact same volume when she reaches them as they were when she heard them on the river. I understand that water carries sound, but not to the point where it is the exact same volume the whole journey, which includes walking on land. A similar occurrence is when she's looking for Rick's place by listening to the birds. Here the birds are only audible when the characters need to find their way over, but when they're trying to find each other, the birds aren't audible. Now this could very well be an attempt at portraying the subjectivity of the character's hearing, which changes depending on what they're focusing on, but it's not done in a subtle or varied enough way to actually get that across. So back to the pacing. In the afternoon before all the shit goes down, we get exposition about literally everything that's going on in Sandra Bullock's life. In just 2 conversations, we learn about her ex, her anxiety about having kids, her childhood. For some reason, everyone's lecturing her about her kids. We get this really lazy and blatant comparison to an art piece, and somehow it's all crammed into this short amount of time. I will commend the film's ability to relay all that information in such a short amount of time, but the way they do it, pretty much all conversationally, just feels incredibly unnatural. Then they try to give each of the characters in the house something of an arc while having the parallel structure of the river scene that they're cutting back and forth from, but neither really gets enough screen time to fully develop. There's one scene where the druggie is interested in the cop and she's all like,
"Not a chance."
And the next scene they're in, they're fucking. And then all of a sudden it's like they've been in a long-term relationship. Although in all fairness, the progression of time is a little unclear. It's shot kind of like a sitcom with the same establishing shots and the wide kitchen set. There's even this scene where Trevante is basically like, well gang, looks like we're out of food. So we don't know how long it's been. And that coupled with the lighting just enhances the artificial sitcom feel of it. But the bigger problem I'm trying to get at here is that the film deals with restriction lazily. After this scene, the relationship between the druggie and the cop is only seen through Sandra Bullock's eyes, which makes it surprising when they steal the car out of nowhere. If we were restricted completely to Sandra Bullock, I think I'd be more okay with it because I'd see how the plan went down behind the scenes, but because we get those occasional scenes with just them and no restriction, this scene doesn't feel earned at all. And I have no idea what kind of arc they were going for with John Malkovich, whose performance is laughably bad in this film.
Is we're all gonna die soon.
He was an asshole to his ex-wives, but loved the wife that died, so he was mad at Sandra Bullock, but then they made amends, but he still had that hubris, claiming to always be right. But his demise wasn't a result of anything to do with his character. He was right about Gary, but then he just died. Olympia at least died due to a character flaw, being too open-minded and impressionable, and Cheryl didn't even have a character trait, although she was the one who knocked John Malkovich out. I don't know. I don't know. The film asks us to believe a lot, like the fact that Greg would sit down at the computer, and after a few minutes the monster thing would just know he's watching and come around to the security camera. Or even worse, for some reason it made sense to, rather than give Sandra Bullock twins, give her one kid and introduce a character who happens to have a very similar due date, who happens to go into labor at the exact same time as her. I guess it adds a little pizzazz to her relationship with the kids, but that doesn't even end up being all that relevant, and the amount of disbelief we're supposed to suspend does not make the payoff worth it. And they introduce Olympia, and she says her due date is around the same time as Sandra Bullock's, and we see from the ultrasound that Sandra Bullock is only pregnant with one kid, so immediately we know that one of the kids is Olympia's, presumably because she died. But the editing and the music indicate with this Hello Kitty toy that it's supposed to be this big, mind-blowing reveal that the girl is Olympia's daughter and not Sandra Bullock's. But we already knew that. Even down to the rules of this monster thing, the film does a terrible job establishing how it works. And on one hand, I get that the characters don't understand how it works, so we don't, and that can add suspense. But on the other hand, when there are no rules or limits established, literally anything can happen in the movie, and there's no grounding whatsoever, which is essential for suspense. They can't look at the monster in real life, obviously. They can't look at it through a computer screen, but they can look at the blindfolds that are slightly revealing. It only affects you if you look at it, but suddenly they can hear things talking to them even though they can't see it. Some people try to kill themselves, some people fall in love with it and try to make other people look at it, some people just drive around unaffected by it. This is a terrible design. This is no design at all. This is throwing everything to the wall and going with it even if it doesn't stick. And the birds, the very title of this movie. It's called Bird Box because the birds can detect when it's nearby and they keep the birds in a box eventually. But first of all, why are there birds in a supermarket? How are they still alive after all this time? Why does Sandra Bullock, not yet knowing they can detect it, decide to take them? Then they discover that the birds freak out when it's nearby, but they don't do it every time. They freak out when Fish Fingers is telling the group to go outside and look, but they don't freak out when Gary shows up, who is presumably affected the same way. And actually, I can't think of a time when they're in the box that they freak out. And why would they need the birds if they keep their blindfolds on anyway? And they can even hear the thing telling them to take the blindfolds off, so they know it's there. What purpose do the birds serve then? Why is that the title of this movie, other than the catchy alliteration? I've got to talk about this scene real quick. It doesn't really tie into anything else I was talking about, but it has to be mentioned. Okay, they black out the windows and use GPS? Fine. They don't pop a tire even though the roads are filled with car debris? Fine. I don't have a problem with suspension of disbelief in this scene, but the whole thing plays out like a damn car commercial. In fact, up until this point, this film would make a great Super Bowl car commercial. In the wake of an apocalypse where people aren't allowed to look outside, this car has the technology to get people where they need to go safely. Even the speed bump line, the only legitimately funny gag in the entire film, it'd be perfect. However, this is a movie, not a Super Bowl car commercial. And at the grocery store, the reason they're like, we can't stay here, is that the other people are at the house? Why not just drive them to the grocery store? I mean, I understand eventually that they don't want to be around Fish Fingers, but the initial argument makes no sense. So, I have a really odd concern regarding the relationship developments in this film, aside from this one, of course. When I saw the trailer, I thought Sarah Paulson's character was supposed to be Sandra Bullock's domestic partner, and that they were having a kid to raise together. Then the movie started and Sarah Paulson came in, and they had clear chemistry, and only later was it revealed that they were sisters. At first I thought this was my bad, mistaking a sibling relationship for a romantic relationship, which was very uncomfortable. So then Trevante Rhodes comes in, spittin' game,
My hot babysitter.
like he's watched a little too much porn, but it gets worse. He mentions rubbing his sister's belly, saying this as a way to get close to Sandra Bullock in a romantic way.
I'm always touching her belly.
I'm gonna say that again. He mentions something he did with his sister that he'd like to do with Sandra Bullock in a romantic way. Then later it actually happens. He rubs Sandra Bullock's stomach in a romantic way, and there's a fucking match cut to the two siblings 5 years later, one of them with their hand on the other's belly. What kind of connections is the film trying to make here? What is it trying to say? What kind of incestuous editing is this? Again, at first I thought I just read the situation incorrectly, but it kept coming up again and again. What the fuck? It's time we finally get into the themes of this film. The backbone. Sometimes, even if the surface level film isn't great, the themes can elevate the film overall, like with Annihilation, which I still wasn't the biggest fan of, but it's laughably incomparable to Bird Box. But, as expected, this film doesn't land thematically either. For one thing, we've got this line from Trevante,
Surviving is not living, Mal!
that I saw a bunch of people praising on Twitter. Oh, how eloquent, how insightful, how original. Oh, wait, what's this, 12 Years a Slave?
Well, I don't want to survive. I want to live.
Now, I'm not going to go through and dig up every instance of this line, because there are so many shows and movies that use it, but the fact that this is the one line people point to in this movie that's supposed to be deep, and maybe it was already a cliche when 12 Years a Slave used it, but that film builds a context around the line that makes it passable, and also that film has so much more to say than just that. I'm really sitting here comparing Bird Box to fucking 12 Years a Slave. The more important theme, however, is the parental theme that's sort of the basis of Sandra Bullock's arc, except there's really no sense of development in it. She expresses a distaste for children, everyone scolds her for it, she's put in a bad situation, she has the kid and has to take on another kid, and she doesn't really seem to be affected by it. When it cuts to 5 years later, it looks like she's happy to have the kids, even though life still isn't anything great. But they're named boy and girl. See, this is a film that relies on subtlety to get its message across. Her reluctance to have kids is so strong, so blatant, that she won't even have the decency to give them names or let them call her mom. Is it really 5 years later that she decides to name them and finally decides that kids aren't such a bad thing to have? 5 years into their childhood? And of course she names them Olympia and Tom. I'm surprised Tom even let her name them boy and girl in the first place. Thinking about character consistency, I'd see him as a character who would explain to her that it's dehumanizing to name them boy and girl. That if they ever encountered a society or even just another group that had children, they couldn't go around with names like boy and girl. And I think they try to shoehorn in an arc about her accepting the girl as her own even though she's Olympia's daughter. But if the film is also giving her the arc of not wanting kids in general, it becomes so confused, the difference between how she feels for the boy and how she feels for the girl. It's totally convoluted. It's probably one of the dumbest character arcs all year, and that's really saying something considering some of the movies that came out in 2018. Even the music was disappointing in this movie. I was so upset to find out that this generic score was done by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Almost as upset as when I found out Hans Zimmer did the score for Widows, which was easily the worst part of that movie. There are a lot of other little things I can complain about. The manipulative editing here. Why doesn't Tom say, "Hey, it's me" in this scene when he approaches her? Why does he put on pants to answer the radio? Why does Charlie continue to wear the vest the whole time? Why is Charlie still insistent on writing his book if he's accepted that the world is ending? Why does the electricity last so long? When you come out of freezing water in cold weather, a jacket isn't going to keep you from getting hypothermia. You have to dry off. Why does John Malkovich say that every outside contact has been deadly when Olympia is right there and hasn't hurt anyone? And this scene, just everything about this scene confuses me. I don't even know where to begin. I could keep going, but that would be nitpicking. None of that stuff bothers me as much as all the other things I've talked about in this video. And this isn't cinema sins, after all. I do think this film is atrocious, and I'm struggling to grasp what anyone got out of it in terms of entertainment. On its own, it's bad in every conceivable way, but in the context of other films, it's painfully reminiscent. What's new about this movie? The not being able to see thing? And people think it's like a political allegory or something. The book may have been. I haven't read it. But I promise this translation yields no allegorical significance. This film was absolutely terrible, and I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 10 just because it was sometimes competent. I'm really grasping at straws here, giving it the benefit of the doubt, and that benefit is giving it a 2 instead of a 1. So, you're welcome, Bird Box. Look guys, I'm not some sort of movie sadist, okay? I don't enjoy tearing movies apart for the sake of it. But when a movie such as Bird Box comes along, that's so appallingly terrible and is being held in such high regard by the masses, I have to tear it apart because it's just terrible. This movie's fucking terrible. Even Stephen King endorsed it. It's baffling. I mean, okay, the dude can like what he likes, but his consistent quality of books would suggest that he has a good taste in horror stories. A fundamental understanding of how to portray complex, three-dimensional characters. He's been vocal in the past about movies he's disliked, and this film is such a blatant ripoff of The Mist at times. I don't know why he of all people enjoyed it, and why he of all people is saying, don't listen to the critics, go see this, and this is what Netflix is advertising on their front page now? Guys, Roma exists. Roma just came out. Roma is a Netflix original. Roma is incredible. Go watch Roma instead of fucking Bird Box. Or watch A Quiet Place, or Hush, or Don't Breathe, all of which are significantly better than this movie. Watch The Mist. Well, don't watch The Happening. I can't in good conscience endorse that film. That film is also terrible. But the point I'm trying to make here is don't watch Bird Box. There are so many better movies you can watch. So many better movies that are on Netflix, which is the only place you can legally watch Bird Box. There's so many options, and the fact that this is what people are choosing to watch makes me kind of sad. My name is Taylor Williams. Follow me on social media. Pledge money on Patreon. Feel free to tear me apart in the comments. But more than anything, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.